Hello, sirs and senoras. What I'd like to do here is talk about the Hobbit trilogy. it's it was a series that when the first Hobbit movie came out, I watched it. I pretty well enjoyed the first Hobbit movie. Uh, I hoped that the I didn't know it was going to be a trilogy at the time. I thought it made sense that there would just be two movies, and I hear that was maybe originally the plan. But three movies ended up not quite working. And so I was watching them recently and decided that they weren't as bad as I first thought. And that the real problem was just how much unnecessary content there was in there. Um, that I believe that if you take these movies and you hack out a ton of the shoot in stuff and fix some pacing issues, that you end up with just two shorter, pretty good movies, actually. And so I want to make that argument and kind of just show you what I've done. I've taken it in here, and as you can see, the first one only goes to about 2.25 hours before the credits roll, and that's actually is pretty good. And then what I ended up doing is taking the second and third ones and combining them into about a 2.5 hour movie. So now I actually really liked the beginning here of the first Hobbit movie. They go into Ereborn and give you so much exposition here that's just really concise, and you get such a good feeling of the what the dwarves look and feel like in their world. They did such a good job, even though a lot of it is CG. But so I really liked also that they did a little character building. So they give you all this incredible amount of exposition in only about 10 minutes, less than 10 minutes. If the whole movie, if the whole series could have been as good as that, it would have gone a long way. But I'm here for the argument that we can basically make that happen here with a bit of cutting. You get to Bilbo writing his story here, and I really like, of course, that they're using some of their old sets here. It's really great. Now, I loved the Elijah Wood cameo, and then I immediately hated it as soon as it started dragging on too long. So, this is my first cut, I think, here, where I just cut out the rest of his cameo, which came along with some exposition that I don't remember and really was not important at all. Something about a party. So if you just cut right here to where Bilbo's sitting in his front yard, and then it flashes back to Martin Freeman, works really well. So right there, you've cut out at least a couple minutes. So, but that's the point, is that pacing is really important, and it wouldn't ever be a problem if it was just an occasional thing. But this same problem happens again and again and again in these movies. So just checking my microphone's on. I really loved the performance here by Martin Freeman, Gandalf. Most of the characters have really excellent acting here. So not a lot of cutting is really needed to be done in this part, but you get to the dwarves coming in, and again, you start to get a little bit of dragging. So if you just cut out a few of the unnecessary dialogues and basically jump in right to where they're at their table, having their meeting about what they're really doing here, then it's still quite enjoyable. One thing that this movie does, at least a little bit, I actually felt like it was a very clever amount. Not incredible, well, maybe not incredibly clever, but it's good. It's good. A good amount of cleverness is the music. They put in a song here. It's followed, 5-10 minutes later by another musical with the dwarves, and they have great contrasts that have just a lot of fun in them. Um, I was trying to forward to where it is, but Misty Mountains Cold, I think is the name of the song. So within the first half hour, you've gotten some music, great exposition, some fun characters, and if you just cut it to flow well, it's a really great start. So some people have complained that the adventure took too long to get on, but I really don't think that at this point I've cut more than maybe 5 or 7 minutes out of the whole thing just to make some pacing issues. The I get to do a lot of kind of petty cuts during this. The first one is right here. As you can see, I stopped it right before it cut. It's a problem that the movie has worse later on, but when you're doing a project of this, there's no reason not to do the little stuff as well. Where he has a complaint about not having his napkin or something like that, and they have a little bit of a dialogue about you're going to have to do without napkins from now on, Mr. Bilbo. And it came across as childish. The message wasn't bad, but the way they did it just felt very, well, okay, why are we having a scene about this? You cut that out, and you just immediately get right after that little bit, you get some meaningful about, like, the world is before you, and goes on well like that. So it's just some minor cuts going up to here, and then we come to the next big problem that I've seen in this series, which is an inconsistent tone. In this particular case, it's the exact opposite of the problem with the napkin, where the napkin felt too childish, like it was, because it's not something that like a real adult would do, right? They wouldn't be all like, well, I have to go back for my handkerchief, like, no, like that's something maybe a 4-year-old would do. Here we have too much in the opposite direction. You have shows this guy actually being beheaded. It shows them throwing the head and whatever. I found a way to cut that out and still have the story flow pretty well. A fun little thing that I had watched this 4 times or so during my edits, but didn't notice until my final run through that this guy that Balin is hugging here, you can also see him in the background right here with the little mohawk. That's Thwalin. I guess they were just trying to portray him being younger, and apparently his younger self, he had a mohawk. Alright, interesting. You can see him. There was another scene where you could see him a little better, but anyways, over here, if you don't know who I'm talking about, well, he's the bald guy that has sort of hair on both sides. Where is he? Yeah, there he is. Right there. Anyways, so yeah, those are the same guy, Mohawk guy, and that guy, Thwalin. So they also have a problem with, and I still kind of want to go back and maybe cut this a little bit more, but showing the orcs a little too much, excuse me, in Uh, I did cut it back a little bit because I felt like they kept coming to it too much. Um, I didn't cut it right there though, and I guess I thought it was a good enough premonition. But in the original cut, they kept going back to them just a little too much. And I did a little cutting on that, particularly with that with showing the wide orc. And then we come to the next problem, which is Radagast the Brown. So many people felt that he was too childish. Again, coming back to that same problem, which is the spectrum, which is being attacked from both spectrums. It's both too childish and too adult. But Radagast, I like his character. I know the bird poop on the head is a little too much, I would agree, but I'll excuse it just because it's not focused on. They don't do anything more than just show it. They don't show it happening or anything like that. So whatever, it's just his look. But if you just, I cut out some of his intro, and I cut out a bit of the scene in his house, in two ways. One was in just some filler scenes, particularly with him like reacting to the spiders and stuff like that. But there's a surprising amount that I ended up cutting out of that, and then I really didn't like them having the other end of the spectrum that I was talking about. They're like showing like the hedgehog dying and he's shriveling up. And as someone who's owned a hedgehog that has died, that was way too real. So I cut a lot of that to write to hedgehog being revived right away, and that worked. So moving into the story here, you get to where they're camping, and to the ogres once again. The whole childish thing with well, I guess they're technically trolls. So the trolls being too childish. Now I concur that they were too childish, which is why some of the cuts in here exist. But it's really only too much in a couple places. I found that just mostly cutting out the whole like sneezing snot stuff, that you could really make that a much more tolerable scene. So again, you just cut into a few places like right here, and this kind of becomes a little bit jarring. You're cut into from him being right behind you. It just glimpses him being grabbed, and then you show him in his hand. The only problem though is he is, you can see that he's covered in snot, even though I didn't show the whole getting snotted on thing. But those kind of inconsistencies, I think, are worth it to in order to keep people in the scene, keep them feeling like there's not that all these pacing problems and these inconsistent tone problems. So I do remember there was quite a bit of the pacing problem here being you show the dwarves fighting, and then you show Bilbo doing something, and then they show the dwarves fighting, and then Bilbo, and the fighting, and Bilbo, and fighting, and Bilbo. Went back and forth one or two too many times. And ultimately, it wasn't even important because Bilbo was just trying to free the ponies, which isn't the real problem here because there's trolls, and like you get rid of the troll problem, you don't need to free the ponies. So cutting out a bit of that, and that can be really challenging sometimes, especially with the audio. I think the audio was the number one thing that I struggled with this whole time. But there's ways of handling it. We blend audio into other audio, and sometimes you use the audio from another scene in using a clip from another part. There's lots of ways to handle that. So hopefully I did a good job with that. Now, with everything said and done, I really only cut about half an hour out of the final product because this first movie I felt was actually still really enjoyable, pretty good, just had some minor problems, pacing and tone. So after this, we get moving along for a bit. Not much gets cut, but Radagast comes, and there were a few problems here again. So there was I cut the whole stick in the mouth thing, which was only a few seconds. I cut him like toking it up, which was still only a few seconds, but those things really do distract. I get that they put them in because they were trying to be childish. They're trying to uh, the writer had some misguided idea of for the children. Like, no, no one cares that there's a stick in your mouth. No one cares that you're smoking, and it was way too. It was not that is not even a childish thing. That is a childish way of handling a very adult thing. The whole smoking thing. Um, so you just get rid of that, and I cut his little scene with the necromancer short as well to make it just a bit more brief. I don't remember exactly how much I cut out of it, but I just did until it felt right. Um, and then they get chased, and here's where I started making a lot more cuts. I don't know if you can see my cut points very easily. Uh, no, they're not incredibly obvious, but so this chase scene, there were parts of it where it just showed a little too much of Radagast being chased around by his rabbits, and I don't mind him having a sled with rabbits. I mean, that's fun. I mean, I hate to put it in kind of a childish way, but at the end of the day, that's what you're really there to do is just entertain. And it being, pulled by rabbits makes sense within the universe where you have all kinds of fantastical animals. The rabbits aren't talking, they're not dropping anvils on each other's heads, anything like that. But I've heard arguments against the rabbits, and I'm like, I think that is really looking at a different problem. But yeah, I cut the chase scene a lot shorter. Cuts right to them being cornered uh, and then them having being rescued. So all you got to do is just cut out the redundant scenes in that, and then get rid of Radagast sooner, and then it flows fine. So uh, really, there aren't any big cuts then until we get to this scene where Gandalf uh, is talking. He has like his White Council, I think is what it's called. Um, I am assuming that you've seen this movie. Maybe I should have said that earlier. But there was one other little scene with where it shows the White Orc, and I only just briefly show his backside because thought that should have been a lot more mysterious. Um, but you get to that White Council, and it is way too long. You've got Gandalf talking to Saruman, and then they start bickering about Radagast, and then arguing about is the enemy here, is he not? I just cut straight to once he mentions Radagast, and you can hear the bickering in the background, but then he just pulls out the sword right away. Cuts out maybe a whole minute, and that minute just felt like the world. Sometimes, like I was saying before, just you get distracted by something and it's terrible. It just ruins a moment. It ruins a flow, and it makes the movie. Well, you waste 1 minute and you feel like when you're watching it, you feel like you've had 5 wasted. It also brought my attention to another problem this movie has that you don't really notice when you're watching it, like the normal version. And I think the reason you don't notice it as much is because it's a problem that you almost enjoy, which is the movie has a lot of its own natural awkward cuts, because as I was making some cuts, it was sometimes hard to make it feel natural to go from one place to, instead of where it was would otherwise go, to go somewhere else, that it doesn't always feel right. And then there were times when I was doing that where I'm like, it doesn't feel right, and then I'd like watch the original and be like, well, it didn't feel right to begin with. It just, and so that was a perfect example, is when they have this scene where they're just eating, and then they have a joke and they laugh, and then it just cuts away. It's like, wait, what was that all about? Why is that even in there? I ended up not cutting that out. I seriously considered it, but ultimately I enjoyed it. And like I was saying, I'm not trying to cut out as much as possible, just as much as makes it enjoyable to watch. So that little scene made me smile. Part of it is because I really like this actor's performance. Yeah, so then we get after the White Council, and this is just to kind of talk about what the movie does well, is it has these nice heartfelt moments that without I probably wouldn't like the movie at all, without these kinds of moments. So he has this moment where Gandalf is talking with Galadriel, and they I'm not quite there yet, but Gandalf is basically saying, I don't really know why, but it seems like the simple folk of the Shire is just their way of life is what fights evil, not, and that's important, which is why I wanted Bilbo here. So, we get to moments like this in the movie, and this is another one of those things where I felt like you could have absolutely cut out the stone giants fighting each other. Doesn't add anything to the narrative, but it's a really fun thing that they have their challenge in this fantastical little mini setting. The point isn't that the giants are fighting, it's just that they have a trial to go through, and at the end of it, you end up having a character moment of Bilbo being criticized for his ability to fend for himself, and even though he didn't do anything wrong, but it shows that it's in question. I did cut just a tiny bit out of there, again, just a pacing issue, and but we get into where they get caught by the goblins, and I liked a lot of this still, but this is where I got into a lot more heavy pacing issues. And there was this issue with Bilbo, or rather with Gollum, right here. I can see my cut lines. There's a scene where he beats a goblin to death so that he can eat him. And that's the reality. But you don't have to show it so gruesomely. It's a tone problem still. That this is not the same age group as Lord of the Rings, where something like that would be a little more in place. So I cut out the beating. I left in the body getting dragged away, which is only shown very briefly, only even just for context reasons, to keep the scene flowing so you understand where Bilbo is and what he's dealing with. But I really enjoyed the scene with Gollum with his riddles. Did some minor cuts there, no biggie. But the major pacing issues were back with the dwarves when they get rescued by Gandalf, and they do. This is a really subtle thing that they do here that I wish they had kept doing. They added in a little song. It's not out of place. The very first song that they did, you could argue, really didn't make sense in the context of the world, and I didn't care about that. But if you're going to do songs, this is the last that they did, and it's only a few seconds long. It's just the goblins singing about how they're going to torture them, and I felt like it actually did a lot for the scene too, because I think that if you want to have a more fun tone, finding places to put little songs in can go a long way. That was, and that's like the big difference between like what Disney did back in the day and what they're doing now. You know, I still think that. I mean, you saw it in Frozen. Frozen did songs. It was a little bit of a musical, and you didn't need a ton of songs. But in the second and third installments of this movie, there's none, and it stands out to me because in this one, you even just have like a little song about the goblins, like "Ah, oh, you're gonna die," and I think it works. How'd that happen? It works a lot better when you've cut the pacing down. Stands out more as a part of the scene that is impactful. Because there's so much of this where they're just fighting, and some of the fighting is fun, and I left all of the fun fighting in concise ways at least. Sometimes even the fun fighting would drag on. But a perfect example is where all the dwarves are or running in a line, and they pick up this big long pole, and they just push all the goblins that are in front of them to the side to push them off the walkway. That's a fun way of exploring how your characters would deal with that situation, and it doesn't need to be an important part of the narrative, but as long as it doesn't go on too long, that's the stuff that is great to watch. But then they do all this like close-ups of like characters doing like heroic sword fights with individuals. Cut out a lot of that. That's the stuff that gets old really fast. And you can have a little bit of that, obviously, because you do want to show your characters, what they're feeling and going through, but you don't need to keep coming back to it. So when you cut all of that out, I find that even these scenes that drag out can go by pretty fast and be very enjoyable. There wasn't a lot to cut out with Gollum. They did him very well. Some people said that they had improved the graphics a lot from the Lord of the Rings. Honestly, I can't tell much of a difference. So we've still got the dwarves trying to escape. And then you get to a slightly more controversial part, but that I think it's very meaningful to point out that I left in, which was once they get to the end of the line with they fall down the cliff or whatever, and they're all covered in debris, and then the big fat goblin lands on them. Meant to be a comical moment. Some people complain about this, like, whatever, too childish. I think I got a legitimate giggle out of that. And I think the only reason I could was because I had cut enough that it was, at that point, no longer exhausting. It was no longer, okay, we get it. Instead, it was just, a final punchline. But it made sense within the world. It wasn't like dropping an anvil on someone's head, kind of stupid. I keep using that as an example because that's just the comparison of people talk about the cartoony childishness. Sometimes it does go too far like that, like with the trolls. But yeah, I don't think that it's out of place or too much in this case. It's fills within the realm of believable, and even though I could cut it out without really losing too much, that's the kind of thing that I want to see. I want to see the world have fun with itself, and and I'm willing to let that kind of stuff stay in. Um, Really, I probably could have cut this down if I was willing to cut out as much as I absolutely could. I could probably have made this only 2 hours, keeping in all the important narrative stuff, and um, I could probably make it even much more than that if I was, you know, really doing a lot. But the point here is that it's you're not trying to make it super short, because obviously you can make it a lot shorter. The book was super short. Um, I wanted to show how you can still use a lot of what they are doing and still be good. So you get to where they show the pale orc. The way I cut it, this is the first time you see him outside of the flashback, where it's, you know, fully from the front him, and they I cut it to be obvious. This is another one of those places where I did a bunch of cuts to keep it shorter. um, I also had to just cut out a lot of stuff in order to keep the focus right. So they jump right into the trees. Gandalf starts making fires, and uh, and then Thorin basically just goes right into Thorin challenging the Pale Orc, um, which of course he loses, and then I cut it more so that we jump right to, oh, I had it there for a second, right to Bilbo going to his aid. And that really is what this first film, it is important for this film, which is why I was so aggressive in this scene to making sure that that gets cut right to, and that the point is left on, is that Bilbo has that in him to defend someone that he believes in, who doesn't necessarily believe in him, which of course comes back at the end. So the Eagles save them pretty quickly, since this is all getting hacked up. Get right to what is a fabulous scene where Thorin recognizes Bilbo for his merits. And there's not a lot of cutting to do there. I did make the Eagles shorter as well. For some reason, they did a bunch of like establishing shots with them like flying to different places, and I'm like, no, just show them flying, then show them landing somewhere else. It doesn't have to imply that it's super far away. So, and then that is all that we needed. So, as you can see, like, if you think about, like, oh, what did I cut out? Well, it doesn't seem like that much, but after all is said and done, that's half an hour out of this one. Let me load the second one. Okay, so this would be the second one, which is which compiles the second and third one, which together would be almost 6 hours, and this one is just a little over 2.5 hours. So huge cuts in this one. Again, sticking to pacing issues, to consistent tones, to and what gets worked on a lot here is fight scenes that drag out. There was a scene in the beginning that starts with Gandalf meeting Thorin. It's like a flashback where he urges him to begin his quest. I hated that scene. I just hated it. It added nothing to anything. It showed us what they had already told us in the first one. We didn't need to see it, and the only reason I can think of that it was even there was just so that they had an opening shot, rather than just being like, now to conclude this, whatever. I was thinking of some kind of cartoony way of starting it, but that's basically what I do, though, is I just go right from the title screen to now they're approaching Mirkwood. uh, we're this is not a standalone movie. It is a sequel. It's part of another story. It's okay for it to just pick up where the other one left off. Um, you've probably seen the movie, so if you know how it flows, you know that I cut out the whole Bayon thing. Is that his name? Bayon. Anyways, the big bear guy, because it added nothing. They just got chased to his house, and they spent some time talking with him. He's all like, "All right, I'll give you some horses." Um, nothing important was explored there whatsoever. The only, I mean, he's all like, "I hate orcs," or "I hate dwarves, but I hate orcs more." It's like, well, duh. Wait, I'm sorry, but you're not. He was kind of a cool character, but they didn't do anything with him, so he just got cut out. Um, let's see. They start immediately with a problem that I had to deal with a lot, which was Gandalf going on his own separate journey. Um, because his journey wasn't particularly interesting, but I didn't want to cut it completely out because it um, had just enough kernels in there to kind of be all like, what is Gandalf doing? Um, I really did love Mirkwood. The whole thing uh, was just an enjoyable experience where they torment you and then they give you this wonderful little nugget of fresh breath air, in literal ways as well. Um, they ended up fighting the spiders. I did a little cutting on the action as usual, but there was one very small thing that I cut that bothered me a lot. So, um, Bilbo, uh, he drops his ring and he goes after it, which separates him from the group. Cool. That I like that they use that as a narrative tool to separate him because he needed to be separated for what happens next. But then they do something that makes no sense. They have him become too aggressive, and then they show him recognizing that something is wrong. Like he's like, "What's wrong with me?" kind of moment, which is obviously implying that the ring is already having an effect on him, and that it makes sense if you've seen Lord of the Rings. Okay, you understand this is the one ring, and it's not just a magic ring. It's serious business, and that would be fine if they continued to show these kinds of scenes where they show him getting more and more corrupted and him being more disgusted with himself, culminating in something. But they never do. Never. It is a one and done thing that goes nowhere. So even though it's only like a few moments long, yeah, I cut that out. It's you just show him going and getting his ring, finding it, and whatever. Moving on. Then we come to what starts a whole nother topic, which is as you can see there, he's getting his ring back. Legolas. Hey, Legolas. I do not mind that they put Legolas in here. It makes sense. He is from Mirkwood, and he was alive at that time, canonically. Him and girl Legolas, though, have way, way too much screen time. I cannot count how much screen time I cut out exactly because it's so much. For all I know, that might be like a whole 3 hours of what I cut out. I'm sure it's not, but the point is, I had to make. So he makes sense here. I don't cut out a lot, but there was some dialogue that I cut out, and then it moves on to girl Legolas having her affair with the dwarf, and I cut out a lot there too. So there's no love subplot with the dwarf and the elf. It is completely gone. You never see anything about it. Um, I cut out a quick inconsistent tone thing where this guy's face becomes all distorted and talks about suffering dragon fire. That's a subplot that is stupid and goes nowhere, in my opinion. Um, which was a little tricky to cut out because of the way they put the shots together, but I made it work. Um, we get to the barrel scene. I really enjoyed the barrel scene. This comes back to what I think the first movie, did well at times. That the book, in particular, did a great job of course, which is why they did a good job here. It's just a fun scene. It's having an adventure on the river. It is burdened, though, and I think this is why a lot of people didn't recognize that it was a good scene, with a lot of unnecessary fighting. But guess what? If you cut that fighting out, well, particularly all the elf fighting, and just a little of the dwarf river fighting, you can't cut it all out. Otherwise, you're doesn't make sense as to what's going on. So you get the impression that the elves are engaging the orcs, and these guys go on their own little adventure. I cut out just a little bit of this stupid guy, the fat guy, the fat dwarf, Balfin, of him doing something silly. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, but then that scene just concludes without too much dragging on. Let's see, there was a little bit of Gandalf where he's just talking about seeking out the necromancer. But the next major thing was them going to Lake Town. So Lake Town got a little tricky at times. I basically cut out all of the Bard stuff that I could, that tried to make him a deeper character than he needed to be. Bard just needed to be a person with a conflicting goal to Thorin's goal, which comes up more later. But so I cut out a lot of his backstory. I cut out the whole. There was that character that was basically like Wormtongue. I think his name was Alfred. Cut out as much of him as I possibly could, which was a lot. There was very little that needed to stay. So, there was a scene where he interrupted when they first got to the city. Just cut that out. No need. Whatever. They hide in barrels with fishes, and then they get out of the barrels, and then they sneak over to this guy's place, to Bard's place. So, Bard helps them, thinking nothing of it, but then realizing that they're going to doom them all. There was some stuff in there, obviously, that got cut out. This is more about what did stay in, because it's a lot easier. Just, they got to the house, they snuck out, Bard went and found that what they're really after, and then they're caught by the city guard. So they talk to the master of the town. He's really just the mayor. I wish I could just call him the mayor. Who says, no, we want you to go reclaim the mountain. We want gold too. So there was more stuff with the mayor and Alfred that basically all you really see of them is that scene. And then, of course, they go on their way, and there's a bunch of subplot stuff about the dwarves getting separated, and I just got rid of that. There was this whole thing with them being separated, and Killy is sick, and then like the elf girl comes and heals him, but the town is under attack, and now in my cut, that is just all gone. No one cared. I didn't care. It wasn't fun. It made the whole movie just feel like a burden. So the problem, of course, being is consistency in the narrative with where all the dwarves are. And if you're really paying attention, you would notice all kinds of little like wait, why is that here, and why am I not seeing this and that? So those are just the sacrifices that come with doing those kinds of things, but I think that overall is not too distracting. So they've got some good scenes here. You don't see like a lot of cuts in this area. They get into the mountain, um, and there's a few cuts here, but not much, because I enjoyed most of this. But this shot right here is a perfect oh, uh, example of something small getting under my skin again. Um, it just made no sense. There was Balin talking to Frodo and about what he's doing and what he's going to do, and then Balin just starts laughing and being all like, "Oh, hobbits amaze me." Um, what? The That doesn't make any sense. You weren't talking. You weren't being amazed. You were telling him how to do the thing that he agreed a long time, and he's been working this whole movie towards. This is what he's going to do. He's worked up his courage, and now he's doing it. There was no reason to be amazed by hobbits at this point. It's nothing different than what you would have done. It's nothing different than what he has built himself as being capable and willing to do. So that's me cutting out whatever 15 seconds, whatever it was, but that I hated. I understood when immediately upon seeing it that this was a writer who was like, well, we need to lighten the mood just a little, and I really want to bring back the what Gandalf has been saying about hobbits ever since ever. Have someone else recognize it, and to reinforce that idea. But it made no sense to put it here. This would be such a better thing if it was after he had done something that nobody expected him to do. So that was stupid. I won't rant about it too much. I really enjoyed Bilbo and Smaug. I think I cut just a tiny bit of their dialogue at one point. For some reason, I felt it necessary that you're showing Killy here being in Bard's house. I don't remember why, but that's one thing I wish was not there. And then we get into a lot of heavy cuts from here until the end of the second movie. Reason what I'm cutting out here is, well, I cut a little bit of him wandering around before he finds Smaug, just a little. Cut out what was another. There's so many parts where I'm only cutting that like 15 seconds, but that adds up. But once Smaug and the dwarves get together and start fighting, there's a lot of action that is unnecessary. I cut right to them running to the forges, which was probably maybe like 10 minutes of stuff. So that's where you can save a lot. But before then there was so much of like, oh, the dragon is chasing us, and now we got away, and now he's chasing us again, and now we got away, and now he's chasing us again, and so just cut really aggressively there. Just start up the forges. He chases around a little, and then we get the gold flowing, and we go to the the throne room or whatever it is. There's the big mold, gets filled with gold, and then they break the mold out, and the gold falls over the dragon. Some people thought that was stupid. I did not mind that, and again, it probably is just because when you cut out so much of the unnecessary stuff, it feels so much more like a small thing, like it's really meant to be. This isn't. I guess some people were just complaining, like, oh, like this doesn't make sense that this much gold would get filled, and then it just has this comical moment, this cartoony moment of being together and then falling all apart. That's those are probably all true things, but they don't really matter because it's not. I feel like it's the right amount of comicness, of cartooniness that's meant to just embellish an idea. Uh, it's not incredibly unrealistic, and ultimately it's there just to serve one purpose. And if you're not taking too long to do it, that purpose is just that they do something clever that makes the dragon mad. Well, obviously they were hoping it would defeat him. It doesn't. It makes him mad, and he's like, "Screw you guys! I'm gonna go blow up your favorite town." And I think that's a really great way to move the story forward, and just making lots of little cuts. Just make that happen faster. Make it happen faster and get right to Bard's little thing, where now we're into the third movie, and Bard he has his character arc to uh, overcome Thorin's mistake. He has to fix Thorin's mistake. So that is a nice way of putting the odds at each other. Okay, so did I skip something big there? Okay, so as far as Gandalf's thing goes, it's hard to explain what all I cut out, but basically he has um, what I didn't cut out is where it shows him talking to Radagast earlier, where he was like, "We're going to go to the Necromancer." Then there's a little scene later where they get to um, the evil place, and Gandalf says, "I'm going in," and I just show him walking in, and then it's cut out. And then a little later, it shows him getting overwhelmed by who's in there. The original story has that a lot more extended about the how that encounter starts and how it ends, and I really just cut to that he gets ambushed, and it hints that Sauron is there. Here it's showing him that that's happened and he's encaged, and then later he will get rescued. And the rescue I also of course cut down as well, but there was one particular little thing in that. I'm not there yet in this, but I'm just going to talk about it now. Galadriel has something that really disturbed me. It came back down to the tone thing about it being too dark and too weird. She goes into her little demonic form, much like she did in Lord of the Rings, and maybe it only goes on for like 10 seconds or so, but she like does this little evil speech and then vanquishes Sauron. I basically just cut that down to I let them fight the ghosts or whatever, and then with Galadriel, I cut her being a demon thing down to just a couple seconds. She doesn't get any big long speech. She just pulls out her ring, looks evil for just a second, and then there's a flash of light and Sauron is gone and she's back to normal. I really think that's the best way to approach that, because that is just so out of place and so weird, and a lot of people would probably defend that. I don't think it's consistent. I think that you don't need her giving a little speech about how evil is evil and good is good. No one cares. Just show her doing her heroic thing so that you have an understanding that Sauron is the real evil. Galadriel vanquished them back to Mordor, and that's why she's weakened and needs to be taken to Lorien, and that Saruman is supposed to be taking care of Sauron. It sets up a few things that's kind of a cool nod with the Lord of the Rings, the original trilogy, and but doesn't go too far if when you cut it right. Don't mean to ramble about that, but that really bugged me, just having her be all demonic for no real reason. Cut a lot here where um, I'm not going to talk about every time I cut out the elves, but I know that the elves were part of this as well. I did like that Bard had this moment of, oh, he's a hero, and he's all like, no, I'm not your master, and then they're going to kill Alfred, and he's like, no, don't kill Alfred. It sets him in his position really well, that he only wants what's owed to him. He doesn't want fame and glory, but he is put at odds with Thorin for a claim to the gold. And then I cut out tons of Alfred again. He has this really weird role as like, oh, I'm gonna be, a worm to everybody. Like, okay, no one cares. We get it. You're the worm. Moving on. So we have the mountain claimed, and you see Thorin being all upset, and I thought that a lot of that worked really well. Get a lot of good character development between Bilbo and Thorin. Cool. So I don't remember what all of my cuts were, but I know that most of them had to do with side characters. Just focus on, the main characters, what they're really doing. Get rid of Alfred, get rid of the elves, just move it along. There's that other scene I was talking about. Apparently it wasn't that much later. See, I can't even remember. But then in this next part, I really liked the scene with where Bilbo gives the Arkenstone. Are we there yet? Okay. Sorry, there's a little transition time with Gandalf. But yeah, Bilbo ends up giving the Arkenstone. I thought that scene worked really well. But I ended up cutting a lot with like this elf guy that I passed a little back there. He shows up to help, but only for his own selfish means. So I cut a lot of him rambling on. Him also talking to his other elf friends, Legolas and Girl Elf. And all the cuts in here are just really minor things that that you can guess at. But really what we're trying to do is just move it right along to the main confrontation. So the final battle starts here, and as you can see, there's like only like half an hour left, but in the original there's like an hour left, or more maybe. But there was some good stuff in here, but they kept cutting to like minor characters doing stupid little things, especially with like Bard and his family. So cut out as much as you can with unnecessary army fights. I actually did reorder one shot here that was interesting. There was a scene where like the elves, it reminded me of the scene back in Lord of the Rings when the elves all like move in unison, and they do something like here, but then it shows the dwarves charging forward, and but I reordered it just so that the elves do their stance right before the main conflict rather than a bunch of stuff happening in between that. So that's the kind of stuff that I think you probably wouldn't even notice that it was a change because it feels so natural. And anything you can do to just make it flow better, Did keep in a little bit of the stuff happening in the city, just a little. I really enjoyed, though, Thorin's madness, um, and I had to cut out bits of it, which made me a little sad because there were moments where you're like, get on with it. But uh, this Golden Throne Room is a really interesting place where they explore his madness, particularly him only snapping out of it when he's delved into the deepest depths of it. So I did just cut it to be shorter, because there was you hear the voices in his head and they go they start to like repeat themselves. I basically just kind of cut out a lot of the redundancy in it, um, and then they have like this slow, like he like slowly gets swallowed by the gold, and I just made that happen very quickly. All in all, I probably only cut like 30 seconds out of that, but it was another one of those things where 2 minutes feels like 5 minutes, so I cut it down to 1 minute. So that 1 minute can feel like 2 minutes. Makes a big deal in the feel of it and how it exhausts you mentally. Uh, and then we get, let's see, so he's now out of his madness and he's joining the fight. And they take the fight up to this cliff. The cliff, I think, is a good place narratively. Oh, there was a small, tiny thing with here, but that was just for Gandalf. Cut out his little speech about whatever he was talking about. It was lengthy. Anyway, so Bilbo follows them up to the cliff in order to warn them about an incoming something or other. That's fine, but it introduced a lot of problems with trying to make cuts. This was bar none the most complicated part to cut because they were using so many things in the narrative that I had decided were not going to be part of the story. Girl elf, Legolas, yeah, I mean that's the majority of the problem, just those two characters. But so the way it works here is, you know, Philly gets killed, and they start chasing the Pale Orc, and the problem is this other orc that was like kind of a main character, but not really. He knocks Bilbo out, and in the original, he then like fights with the girl elf and Killy, and they have this big long thing, and then Legolas gets involved. So, but the way I'm cutting it is so that this orc knocks out Bilbo, and then it shows Killy jumping him, and then Killy getting killed. And then the problem is how to deal with him after that, because you wonder things like why doesn't he just kill Bilbo as well, and then what's supposed to happen to him after that. And so this is one of those points where I left Legolas in. Legolas, I decided, is a useful tool here to fight this guy. So that's what he's doing there. He's fighting the guy that killed Killy. And but it has just as much to do with the second part of that, which is that Legolas ends up getting Thorin the sword back that he took from him in Mirkwood. And I just couldn't justify cutting out all of this other stuff and leave it just for there to be a really glaring problem of like, wait, where'd you get that sword from? Because it was a very particularly memorable sword, and I didn't think that I could get away with leaving so many questions unanswered. So, anyway, so Legolas takes care of that guy, and then he throws his sword, and Thorin gets his sword back. So I didn't care for, yeah, that was the other orc. I really didn't care for like Legolas's fight with him. It really wasn't very um, memorable. But I loved the fight between Thorin and the Pale Orc. Um, Had to cut out some things, and some things don't make sense. At some points, you see like arrows fly and hit orcs, and you're like, wait, where are those arrows coming from? You would originally see things like, I think at one point Killy threw an arrow, and another point like Elf Girl did, or something like that. But um, that's a very minor thing that I think you can ignore, and it's fine. Um, Love what they did with the visuals here. There's all these warm and cool colors colliding, beautiful contrast, even with the blood. Um, and the fight was interesting. You cut it in a few places to make it flow a little faster, and he does his cool thing where he outsmarts the guy, and then he comes back in through the ice, and then he gets killed. Uh, this is one of those places where I actually appreciate them handling the tone really well. So I wonder if I can get that scene back that I was on for a second. There's the blood, I think, is the best way to look at this. So they show the blood. So this is obviously not something that would be like cartoon kind of appropriate, but it's also still way below what you would see in the original Lord of the Rings. It's cartoony. There's way too much blood, but it is, I think, in the perfect area of tone. Of we don't need to show him whatever getting his head cut off, or a lot of unnecessary gruesome stuff. It's just that right level of understanding that your audience is a little older, but not quite adults. So I really liked that they handle resolving the friendship between Bilbo and Thorin, which of course was in tension right when Thorin was in his madness. So this is a scene I really didn't want to touch too much. I think that I cut out one very minor part near the end where they just focused on like Deathface for too long or something like that. Cut out Bayonne coming back because I cut him in the original in the beginning. But then they have one scene here that I really liked, and it is where Bilbo and Gandalf just sit and they don't say anything. And I like it because it's so telling with just their facial expressions. And I think it's because it recognizes something a little bit more adult. Like, ultimately, your movie should push your audience just a little. And I think that if you were like to look, at the first part of The Hobbit, and they end it with this speech about being wrong about somebody, and they walk away from this really fierce battle, all battered but still smiling and happy. But in real life, when you walk away from something traumatic, particularly when not everybody makes it, or even a lot of times to a lesser degree, you are just kind of in shock and don't really have words for it. So I like that this scene recognizes that. And I think I may have cut just a few seconds out of it, maybe. I don't remember, but I feel like I probably did. But it just did a really good way of of ending this incredibly tense situation with not smiles or celebration, with just taking a breath. And since we've cut so much of that action down, hopefully my audience is not too exhausted to appreciate that moment of breath, just taking everything in. And they do get to a sort of celebration part where there's smiles and, you know, where they all appreciate that most everyone's still alive. I think Thwalin made it. And they go through their journey home. They have a few more heartfelt words. I cut some of which I don't remember exactly what, but I just wanted it. There was one particular little part that I wanted to move on about. I think it was where Bilbo stammers and tries to come up with an excuse about the ring. I think where he's all like, I know about the ring, and Bilbo's like, has a very short reaction and then moves on. The very last thing is right at the end here. I kind of enjoyed where he goes home and everybody is like pilfering his stuff because they think he's dead. Kind of. But in the end, I cut that. The only real reason I enjoyed it was just because I liked where they ask him who Thorin was, and he says, my friend. That is a great line, but it's also repetitive. We've already established that they had a friendship and that they, you know, were able to resolve that before Thorin died. So the rest of it was very uninteresting. So I cut that out. So he just comes, you know, he just shows him going over the hill, and then he's walking in his door, and then he's reminiscing about it, and then it flash forwards to where he meets Gandalf again. And I appreciate that ending. I appreciate it because it's a good way of knowing that life goes on, and sometimes all you have is your memories. Even though it's a bit contrived, like it's showing his empty house. So where he reminisced back out Ring is a good way of bringing it full circle. But then, if it wasn't for this very last part, I don't think I would appreciate it. But just how it goes from that to, yeah, and then eventually your friends come back, and that's just a great little happy note to say you take the good with the bad. And then going into the end credits, I didn't include the end credits for Smaug in this cut. Just the ones in the third movie should be sufficient, I think. That is ending the whole thing. The credits starting right at 2 hours and 40 minutes. What was close to 6 hours originally. So just making tons of pacing calls adds up to a lot of that, but so in this case, so much of it was just getting rid of the elves and their stupid love plot. Anyways, I hope this was an interesting thing to hear about, how I can, and in part, even if you can't see my cut because I can't put it up on YouTube, maybe even just watching the original movies and thinking about what parts are good, and you can make your own cut or whatever. But yeah, there was a lot of good stuff in these, and it just was so easy to get exhausted by things that didn't go anywhere, things that weren't important. Just too much filler, some pacing issues, but it's there. So thank you for listening. Have a good one.